This is Bloomberg UTV.
This is Talkback. I'm Hindol Sengupta. It's a brand new year, of course, and this month we are discussing with key policymakers in India if the next decade is going to be definitively, in some senses, the Indian decade. What will make it the Indian decade? What will be the hurdles? What will be the challenges? And what indeed, of course, will be the opportunities in every sector? Delighted to welcome an old friend of the show, Sachin Pilot. Thanks very much indeed for coming back on Talkback.
Pleasure's all mine.
When you look at your sector and you look at the dichotomy in some senses that telecom experts, analysts point out, that in India, it's an ever-growing number of people using the mobile phones. And it's an ever-growing number of people using the mobile phone more than ever before. So the number of minutes or the amount of time usage is increasingly going up. And yet companies tell us that their revenues are increasingly falling. When you look at the dichotomy in the next decade, for India to build viable companies of global standards, where will that balancing act happen, Minister?
I think 3 months ago, India achieved a milestone target of having 500 million mobile connections.
That's right.
It's not a small achievement, and I think if you look back at the tele-density in this country, 10-15 years ago, it was in the range of 2 or 3 or 4% of people had access to telephone. And today, I think it's become really a commodity. And if you look at the tariff rates that have come down dramatically, I think in the last 5 or 7 years. I remember in the first years when the mobile phone started, it was about 15 to 20 rupees per minute on a mobile phone. And now it's less than 25, 30 paisa per minute. So the call rates have dropped. That's why the usage is increased. And 500 million people are using mobile phones in this country. And the trajectory is always going to be, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, keep growing. And I think we will achieve a much higher tele-density. But I think the challenge really is not about handing out more mobile sets and having more people talk on the phone. The challenge is to remove the disparity that we have between the tele-densities in large metro cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, and the rural parts of India. Now, just to give an example, the tele-density in cities like Delhi and Mumbai is more than 125%, 140%, which is to say that for every 100 people, there are 125 phone connections.
That's right.
And in rural areas, the tele-density is between 15 to 18%. So I think there's a huge disparity. So we are trying to bridge that. And I think for companies, the opportunities are still forthcoming. There is lots of work to be done. Now companies are looking to expand into the tier 3, tier 4 cities and go to rural areas. And there are new services that are getting evolved. So as demands keep changing, the companies are coming up with innovative ideas to provide those services to consumers. And I think they are going from strength to strength. And I think it's a very competitive market, but the ultimate objective of the exercise is to have the consumers get the best services at the best rates.
Is predatory pricing an area of concern in the next decade?
Historically, this predatory pricing was supposed to be assumed to be have done by people who are monopolistic in nature. So the really big guys would do the predatory pricing, but here I think it's a roles reversal. As the new guys are bringing the bar lower and lower. I think if the consumers are gaining by having cheap call rates, I see no reason why one ought to be overly worried about it, because the TRAI and the government has had a policy of forbearance. They have not actively interfered with the call rates that are prevailing in the market, and let the market conditions decide as to which position operator wants to occupy in the cell phone business. So I will say, I think it's a lot of competition, but like I said earlier, the government wants to make sure that the services are available to every citizen in this country at the best possible rates. Now, I think it depends on the competence and the kind of positioning that the companies want to do. I don't think undue interference is required at the moment.
Also, Minister, do you see the next decade in some senses, as some people point out, perhaps could be the decade of two things in this entire sector? Mergers and acquisitions and consolidation in a larger scope. Is that your opinion? Do we see a decade of, in some senses, consolidation as more mergers and acquisitions happen?
I wouldn't like to predict as to how the marketplace will change. but I think the landscapes keep changing every few years depending on the market conditions, depending on the businesses that each company is running. So I really don't want to comment on what might happen in the future, but what we want to establish in this country, and I think we must be given some credit for this in the last 5 or 6 years, we've actually maintained a framework of policy that is consistent, that is able to attract a lot of investment. And I think the confidence that people have in the regulatory mechanism that we've evolved in this country is something that we can all be proud of, and that we have to maintain at all costs. I think that's of utmost importance. Individual players, individual operators, I think are well entrenched in the industry to look after. But I think we're there to make sure there's level playing field, and there is transparency in the way that the industry is operating. I think that's the primary job of the ministry, and I think we've been doing a credible job.
Okay, some critics though say that the challenges in the next decade is to remove what they call the hostile and unpredictable policy regime, especially in transparency. Will that happen, Minister?
No, I think the policy regime has remained consistent. The broad priorities,
but in terms of transparency,
but the broad priorities of the government and the ministry have been, like I said earlier, is to have higher rural tele-density. It is a commitment of the government that we will have 40% rural tele-density in the next 3 years. We have committed ourselves to connecting every village with broadband. I think we are well on our way to achieving that target. We are going to implement our program of having common service centers, 100,000 of them all over the country. So information technology, communication services, and also into areas which are on the borders of our country, which are in hilly areas, tribal areas, sometimes the terrorist or Naxal affected areas. Those are the areas that need special focus and attention, and we are making sure that there are conditions which we will make prevalent, so that we are able to give those services into those areas. The policies have been I think laid down quite transparently, and you see the government's objective has always been to ensure that we attract the best players, that we give the best services, and like I said earlier, that there is some accountability and transparency in the system. And I think if you look at the way the industry has progressed, the kind of penetrations we've had, the kind of numbers that you and I both know, I think they speak for themselves.
Would the government make a commitment that any question marks in the past that have been raised about transparency and accountability are issues that will be erased, in fact ironed out in the next decade?
The next decade is next 10 years. The sphere of telecommunications and mobile telephony is bound to grow. In fact, I think India is the largest and the fastest growing market. So it's a very, very favored destination for all mobile operators around the world. And very soon we'll be having 3G services from the private operators. As you know, BSNL and MTNL already have 3G services. That, like I said earlier, is going to open up a whole new arena for people and services that have thus far not been imagined. And I think one of the most important things that we will see in the next few years is our objective of having financial inclusion for those people who have been left out of that ambit. And I think mobile telephony and IT services and communication services can be a great catalyst in achieving that financial inclusion that we all are aspiring for. Moving into the future, information through communication services, through internet, through the technology that we are developing and putting in place will really help us to grow much more faster.